Hello. So we stressed out the last speaker, telling him to go, and now here we are without a presentation.
So let's do a little experiment here, because this presentation is going to be all about security and feeling secure. And I think that the general concept of feeling secure is trust. And as we are here together in this conference, I think we might trust each other.
Do a little experiment.
Yes.
Yeah, why not?
That'd be like to hug your neighbor? Because that is also a key element of feeling secure, is being willing to embrace someone else. Robin.
Exactly, come. Come on, everybody. It's not so hard. There's a neighbor. Shake hands, maybe. Come on, you can do that.
Yes.
Yeah,
awesome.
See, it feels comfortable. You can trust each other. They're not going to... Come on, he's not going to... Shake his hand.
Yes, you too, in the back. Come on.
Very good. There you go.
What we have established right now is that there are different trust levels. And you might feel more secure or less secure if someone brings you in or out of a comfort zone. And that's the same thing with cybersecurity, because in cybersecurity you first need to know what you're talking about. You need to establish a common vocabulary, because if you don't have a common vocabulary, the other party has no means of ascertaining whether what you're talking about or claiming to be secure is of the same standard of security that they encompass.
You need a common baseline. You need something, not just a vocabulary, but a set of agreements which you've all agreed on to say these are the important things in the relationship we have, and they form the basis of our relationship.
And in the cybersecurity world, we have this interesting conundrum, because there's this word called cyber. And who can explain me what cyber is?
Who's a cyber?
Who has all the cybers in the room?
Yeah, who knows what cyber is? Has
Collect
no one
all
here
the
heard of cyber? You guys don't go to cyberspace and your politicians aren't cyber...
Maniacs.
No, they don't say that?
Juggle.
I juggle my cybers.
You juggle your cybers.
That's a good thing to
Rock
do.
and roll, dude. I juggle my cybers every morning for breakfast. So the thing with cyber is that it's in essence a meaningless world. There comes a thing. I feel we're on a roll. We don't need a presentation.
Oh yeah, who cares?
But
it's one of these flash words. At least where we come from, everyone is like, it's the cyber world, and these are cyber hackers, and you know, it sounds a bit stupid, really, but it is become a common word to basically mean anything IT related.
Yeah, anything snappy or webby or flappy or flatpacky or whatever. Everything
they just want to feel cool when they're saying it. Thank you very much. Let's hope this works. Looks great. We have 2 dongle system.
Ooh, awesome.
Okay.
Does my laptop trust your device?
Yeah, exactly. We're letting someone plug random devices into your laptop.
No, we don't. No, well, it's okay. This should work. So, to come up with a common vocabulary in cyber, we have this awesome thing called standards. And the nice thing about standards is that you have so many to choose from. So, in Europe, we're now basically looking at something that came out of the 1960s and 70s, which is called the Common Criteria, which was a European project, which actually says, look, common criteria, what are we talking about? We're apparently talking about my finger on some kind of device.
Yeah,
this has also got to do with security. How secure is my index finger? Booting up. This will work.
Oh, this
awesome.
is
Open standards in 3 additional pieces. What's there not to like? So, common criteria have been around for years. It's like the ISO 27002, which is a norm, basically a checklist of stuff. Ooh. Yes, I admit I run Windows, I'm so sorry.
Don't throw chocolate eggs.
No, exactly. Don't throw eggs at me. But we'll explain later. But first...
look, we're getting into the actual flow of what we were supposed to say.
Yeah, thank you, Olga, yet again, for putting up the most awesome conference in Zagreb.
Yeah, well done, guys. And thank you for organizing HDMI to VGA
and thanks
via USB-C dongle systems.
I promise to probably never forget it again. So, this is Robin.
Hi.
Robin is a professional Easter egg hunter.
Yeah, exactly. I'm also a pilot, which is not very digital. It's really analog. And I do some ICT consulting. I do some security stuff. And I do some transition management. And I like working with open source.
Actually, flying is very binary. Either you fly or you're dead.
Yeah, exactly. So, you're only dead once, though.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I mean, we're in Dragon
binary.
country. We might come back with the White Walkers.
Yeah, that's true.
So, this is me. I'm Hans. I'm also a professional Easter egg hunter for some reason. So, all the cybers.
Yeah,
you know, we didn't make this up in front. What does cyber mean? Well, according to Wikipedia, cyber is a word that means itself. Nobody knows. Point of origin, I was just elaborating on the European cybersecurity strategy, which found its original foundation in the NIS directive in 2013, has been updated last year. And NISA, the European Network Information Security Agency, now actually has a coordination role within Europe to be able to establish a common framework for network information security incident handling. Other thing is that we have this thing called the digital single market, and if you have a single market, then it helps if you also have a single, trust relation with all your other entities.
So they come with specific rules. For example, they've recently disallowed geo-blocking within Europe. You're allowed to not send your products to a different country. You have to show them with the price you use for every country.
And you can also use your own TV, online IPTV bundle wherever in the EU.
Yep.
Only exception being, I think, Facebook, who does not understand Europe is a union. So for some reason, for political parties in Europe, it's now impossible to campaign Europe-wide, because you can only campaign nationwide.
But European legislators will probably hit them with a fine in somewhere in a couple of 100 million, and they'll go, whatever.
It just shows that apparently Facebook is just this platform from the last century where nation states were still a thing. Law always comes latest or last, but it beats technology.
That's generally because lawyers don't really understand technology. And politicians, well...
We recently had an example in Australia. Who has followed the debate in Australia regarding the end-to-end encrypted chat? I see someone nodding, I see more people.
Someone, yeah.
So who has seen the interviewer asking the Australian minister, "But sir, do you not know the laws of science and math?" And the minister replied, "Well, I don't care, I know the Australian law."
Would you rather sit in a prison?
Yes, he has a point. You have all the time in the world to practice the law of maths and science whilst being in prison. So, technology, yes, it's nice. There's this famous XKCD graph where this Uber hacker claims to have like a zillion bits encryption, and then the Secret Service come in, points a gun at his head and said, "Give up your key," and he will say yes. So, anyway, let's do it more civilized, right? Let's not throw eggs at each other, or bullets. Currently, cybersecurity is mostly implemented on a national level in the EU, so you all have the individual nationwide certs, and usually they're industry fragmented, so finance, healthcare, industry, whatnot.
And where you have centers like in Holland, you have the NCSC, the National CyberSecurity Center, see cyber. They have a recommendations list which you can follow, which is 240 pages, which is why people don't really follow it. A very technical, prescriptive whitelist. Do this, do that. How does this look? How does that look?
Everything from cookie handling to session management.
And it's completely different from the one they have in the UK and the one they have in Croatia and the one they have in Belgium.
Yeah, so now we're going into this nice domain of regulation. And regulation on a European level means harmonization. And harmonization means, well, coming up with a shared vocabulary. And, well, what do you know? We have this thing called the common criteria, which imposes concepts that allow you to, and I'll go to my second slide, increase the overall transparency of assurance for IT products and services, and strengthen trust. Just as we have just done right now, we started out with a very intimate approach, hug your neighbor, and then we ended up with a shake your
A
neighbor's hand,
handshake.
because we are all compatible with.
What they basically want to do is they want to make one language which we all speak, which we all understand, and when someone from Croatia says, I'm using this thing, then someone else in England will say, oh, I know what this thing is. And there's also a list of things that we all think is important, which everyone can use, and you say, if you've done all of this, if you've looked at all of this, then basically you're secure.
And do understand, this is not about just technical security. This is also about people in procurement offices being able to ascertain whether a secure claim of a company makes any sense at all. And they don't have anything to go on a technical level. They must trust whatever the certification body that has assessed the supplier provided them. So we go from, let's say, security by checklist, which is the historical approach, like the 27002, into a compliance-driven approach. So laws become less prescriptive, but invite you to think about what your risk profiles are. So it's a risk-based approach.
Yeah, they become more descriptive.
Yes.
So they tell you what are the things you need to be thinking about.
What is your process? What is the process that you should follow to do risk assessments? And that's like in pharma and healthcare, we've had this as a mandatory practice since the early 1990s. If you develop a medical device or a medicine or whatever, you are obliged to perform risk assessment like failure mode effect analysis or any other type of risk assessment that makes sense. And you need to identify the risks. Risks come from assets and interactions with assets, and just describe what you're going to do about them.
And if you want to sell to a large company, any large company, they will have things called compliance officers. And basically all they're there for is to make sure that what they buy is safe and supported and tested.
Yeah, and no matter how awesome your product is or how technically advanced your product is, if you don't follow a model like this, which includes traceability from requirement phase until delivery, you basically won't be able to sell anything to those markets. And this will become the reality for even more commodity markets like ISPs, for instance. Because basically, if you have like an advanced espresso machine in your house, and your neighbor has one and the other neighbor has one as well, you've got a perfect ingredient for creating a DDoS attack on some poor hospital around the corner or something. And you will see in the future that if ISPs continue to give out uncertified modems and routers, then at some point the hospital will get fed up by being DDoSed by espresso machines and end into a lawsuit with the ISP, thereby, with a little bit of a U-turn, demanding the certification.
Yeah, but you already see that ISPs are taking weird proactive things. There is net neutrality within Europe, but within the Netherlands at any rate, it's quite routine for an ISP to block port 25 outgoing. Just because they're saying, well, you've got uncertified stuff, so we don't know what it's going to be doing. Mail is generally an attack vector, so yeah, we just close the port. That's okay.
So also the same is valid for the general data protection regulation. You have to come up with a processing register. You have to describe what you do. You have to describe measures, and you have to go into contracts with your partners in processing data. The EU educational competence framework is also coming into effect, which has a common terminology for educational courses in cyber, whatever that means. I'm personally responsible for a major Dutch educational facility in formulating the new cybersecurity courses for the next realm, and they won't include shit like that.
Yeah, I think about the most harmonized thing they have in the Netherlands at any rate is ethical hacker. I mean, aside from CCNAs, but generally if you go to a school and you want to learn cybersecurity, because everyone in Holland wants this at the moment, you don't have a harmonized course. Yeah. And some people do this whitelisted, you should always strip slashes stuff. And it's just like, no, you have to think in a secure way.
To the rescue, we have an ISO norm for everything, including this. The ISO 15408 is the basis of the new EU Cybersecurity Act, and it has three parts. Basically, an introduction, which establishes the scope in which it is valid. Well, that goes from everything from espresso machines to nuclear submarines and everything in between, so that's quite broad. Part number 2 outlines the functional components to which a risk-based approach must be taken. And part 3 offers some validation practices to ascertain whether or not your functional security requirements have been implemented correctly.
Can you prove that what you've done has been done right?
Yes, that's the whole point. Is this fit for purpose, and can I validate it? And so it says it's voluntary, but as we just explained, voluntary means nothing. The thing is, voluntary, if you're like an SME who wants to buy networking equipment but also wants to have a cybersecurity insurance, and your insurance provider basically tells you you have no coverage if you don't have certified equipment, well, that's not that voluntary. So usually when you get into laws and norms and stuff and you read the word should, you can almost mentally substitute that for must.
Yeah, if a big company wants to use your product within it and also the libraries that you're using in your product, you're going to have to show them because they're going to be finding this extremely important.
So the ISO 15408, that is a typo, has a trifold scope. Consumers being basically any entity that is at the end of the production chain. So whether you're a company or a procurement officer or a single user in your house, that is you, the consumer. Developers, probably makes sense, hello. And evaluators, of which I can be probably the single entity in the room.
Sometimes.
I feel so alone.
No, there's two of us. Don't feel so alone.
We're together.
We trust each other.
And then we go into this whole process of risk assessment. So who has ever done a, let's say, ISO 27000 based asset threat vulnerability thing?
Any risk assessment?
Crickets.
Are you familiar with risk assessment? Just very quickly, it's basically looking at the dangers that you have and assigning an importance to them.
As you understand, we're now fishing for new topics for next year, so this will be one.
Yeah, exactly.
And basically, an asset can be anything. I'm an asset. I think personally that I definitely am an asset. Do you think so? That you yourself are an asset too? I think you should think so, because people are assets, and roles, people are just as much interacting with other objects in your security scope as any other thing. But your public image, is that an asset?
The building you're in, is that an asset? The server housing you have, the data you have on your hard drives,
etc., etc.
All assets.
Environments. Assets reside in environments. If you're a relic in the Notre Dame, you've had a bad week. You have a schema for everything, of course. In general, it's like this. Owners of assets want to minimize risk. They take countermeasures to reduce risk. And threat agents, e.g. the bad guys or girls, we don't discriminate, they expose threats, and threats take advantage of risk on top of assets. And the one thing, maybe two things, which are most important is if I take any security measure, to what risk am I actually taking this measure? What is the traceability between risk and countermeasure? And also, is a countermeasure correct? So does this measure actually mitigate the risk? And there's three ways of doing that. It's either preventing the risk from taking place in the first place, controlling the effects of the risk, or basically monitoring what the hell is going on because the risk is just too big to mitigate. So another slide. Oh, by the way, all the slides will be posted online as soon as I found the USB-C adapter. This is basically how an evaluation process works. But let's go into something else, namely, why is this important for you?
Oh, we've already started by mentioning if you want your product to be uptaked or used in any kind of corporate environment, you will need to conform to this, or at any rate allow the people who are buying or using your product to put this within their own risk evaluation framework.
Yeah, so like 15 to 20 years ago, we had this novelty where they were like unit testing and behavior testing and stuff, and I was at conferences and people demonstrated stuff like BHATs, and people were like, yeah, sure, and now it's the common standard.
It'll take time, it's going to be boring, I don't want to do it. It's a bit like documentation. Except here we have a legal requirement, just like GDPR says, if you're using data, you have to do something with it. The cookie law, you have to know about cookies, and you will have to know about this.
And if you want to perform that want to demonstrate that some component is fit for purpose within the context that you want to be using it, you're looking at a concept called validation. So you first define, what do I want from this component? I define my requirements. Then I define my validation criteria. How do I test if these requirements are met? And how do I ensure traceability between those? Well, and the ISO 15408 helps you with identifying a number of categories in which they already outline something. But
in
the problem with open source...
in principle it's very simple. Yeah, basically you write down what it is that you want the program to do, and then an if, then, else kind of statements, just like you write tests in Selenium, you can write down what it exactly needs to be doing and how it should pass or fail tests. It's kind of like extended quality assurance.
But in open source, who are you going to call? The community. But who's the community? Is that the lead developer on GitHub? Is that the entity who has sponsored a certain feature? How are you going to do that? Well, so you as a community as a whole, including me and Robin, we should proactively create material for that. We must start to consider the fact that organizations want to use our stuff yet have to comply to laws and regulations as an opportunity. So, because who already, for instance, has ISO certification, other than Red Hat, it's SUSE. And shameless plug, I will be doing an OpenSUSE install demo later on today. Please join me. But SUSE has outlined a number of protection profiles and security targets at which the German Bundesamt für Sicherheit und Informationstechnik, yes, I got it right, basically the German NSA, has ascertained that indeed the SUSE distribution is confirming to its claims for security. So it's a claims-based system.
And these profiles are basically just templates which you can fill in.
So we now have 5 minutes to explain an ISO norm. That would be cool. I think that's more than enough time. So again, we adopt a common terminology. And in the ISO 15408, we talk about a target of evaluation. And that basically can be any asset. So it can be a running system, it can be a software application, it can be my not very smart watch.
But in your case, it will most likely be the program that you're working on and the libraries that you've included in it.
Yeah.
But if you start to implement that for a customer, it will also be the server infrastructure it runs on.
Yeah, the installed and operational version. So if you want to help your customer, you can help them, or any user of a library, help them by providing protection profiles and security test templates to go towards. So again, target audiences are consumers, developers, evaluators, and any other creature having anything to do with IT. Part one is all about tailoring the security requirements. So this is not exactly the usual functional requirements description of like the application should do this when I click that, or as a user, when I expect my application to figure out what 42 is, it should do this. This is a bit the other way around. It's how do I impose certain security constraints on my application, which I then package into so-called protection profiles. A protection profile can, for instance, be a list of requirements for a firewall, and then I have a certain target, which is a firewall, which I'm going to evaluate then whether the package of requirements actually fits this particular firewall. And if you put it in a schema, it looks like this. You go from evaluating a protection profile into evaluating a security target, which is the actual thing to test the incident, and then you evaluate the target.
Which is your whole environment.
So I'm going to skip this one a bit. There's a number of chapters which already outline certain functional components in part 2. So part 2 is the part where you come up with the functional requirements towards protecting your application. And these chapters already, they provide you with a number of common criteria which have to do with cryptographic support.
And generally, they won't tell you exactly how to do it, but they will tell you these are the things you need to be looking at. And if you look at the list, it makes sense.
Yeah, because then in part 3, they go with it the other way around. They will look at how the security requirements have been formulated, and they will perform analysis or pen testing or vulnerability scanning to ascertain whether the requirements have been properly implemented.
Basically, what have you done to make sure it works, the way you say it works, and the way you think it should be working.
And then you have the evaluation assurance levels, which basically mean this feature has been documented properly, it has been tested in some way, shape or form, and that goes increasingly from, let's say, a very minor coverage level onto a formal design and verification pattern. And part 3 has numerous assurance classes and components in which you can already dive and do your benefit, because they have already outlined several ways of checking whether or not a requirement has been met. So, benefits and opportunities, because you have listened to this for about something slightly less than half an hour. But if we do this in general, and if we will create protection profiles and security targets and templates, etc., we will make it very easy for companies to include our libraries in their offerings and hopefully give you something back by either contributing code or just money.
Yeah, donate code, money, but also fame, fortune, riches beyond belief.
Yes, absolutely. We should all be rich or get rich or die trying or something. But indeed, you need this. If you do not, if we as a community fail in coming up with these compliant requirements, you will see that open source libraries will be used less and less and less in regulated environments. And well, the thing is, these are the environments that actually have money. So we should come up with that. So we actually think that that is a very happy ending.
We made it on time. Despite USB problems and stuff, we're quite happy.
And that was an ISO norm in 5 minutes sprint. We could do this again. But I think we have -2 minutes for questions.
How much time do we have? We have 5 minutes.
We apparently have 5 minutes.
Any questions? Oh, there's one there.
Question over there. I will just run around.
Thank you. So the question is how much this applies to the regular Joe hacker, you know, to someone who programs the code, and it's not really interesting into selling into some regulated environments, but just wanted to contribute to some open source project or library which is being used. Will he have to do the compliance checking and process, or will that responsibility be on somebody else? What are your thoughts on that?
So well, hopefully the community will have a process in place to do that. Like most communities already have a security testing or security team in place, because the worst thing that can happen is that indeed a Joe user or a Joe hacker makes a undocumented change to a system, and then a requirement in the protection profile is not met anymore.
But it's not so very hard, because if you add a feature as Joe hacker to some sort of whatever, and you basically say, add a line saying, this is what this feature does, that's your requirement, and then say, this is how you can test it, that's your PP, that's your profile package, then basically you can send those 2 lines, it's really short, to the owner of the repository, and they can include that in their tests and include it in their functional requirements. Job done.
Yeah, the most important thing is realize what you're doing, and if you are creating a change to a component in a library or an application that may have an impact on its security profile, then you should be aware of that. But you should be aware of that anyway, because if you're not aware, or if the change that you're making has an impact on security, I do not want you hacking on my code at all.
And generally, these repositories run these tests anyway, you know, they don't just accept any old contribution. You know, they test the contributions and say, yes, this one's okay, or they send it back saying, well, it's breaking something here. That's already automated. They just want you now to tell exactly what it is and how to test it.
But the short answer, yes, it will have impact, because this is, especially in free software and open source, we don't restrict the usage of software, but the other way around is also true, that the lawmaker imposes demands on us. And if we want our software to remain used, and it's actually doing pretty well at the moment, the European Commission has a very enthusiastic research program like Horizon 2020 and stimulates most of the software coming out of there under open source licenses, then we should maintain the pace.
Yeah, we're seeing large deployments such as LibreOffice at the Italian Ministry of Defense.
Yeah.
I don't know if we should be happy about that, but it's being taken. There is a large uptake. Fortunately for us, it means that basically people are recognizing what we're doing at a higher level, at the purchasing level, but we have to offer it to them in a way that they can use and that they can fit into their organization. Because if it's not documented and it's not been tested, then
it's not going to be used. So maybe one more question over there. Yeah, sure.
You're going to run again?
Yeah.
Well done.
I can do that.
I'm going to stand here. I'm just going to stand here and be lazy.
What is the timeline for the legal harmonization? When we can expect to have a legal requirement in Croatia to implement something like this?
So we're starting with we have already started with creating the security schemes. I was at an ESA session in January in which the first schemes were launched for networking equipment, but the target timelines is there is not really an end date. The thing is that the new law will come into effect somewhere in 2020. That means you have a number of years to adapt to it, but you should start reading the norm. So just download, it's free, it's actually an open norm, the 15408. It is surprisingly readable for an ISO norm, especially late at night if you're feeling a bit insomniac and want to have something to do. But yeah, well, so actually it starts now.
And as it said, it's voluntary. So you don't have to do it, but if you don't, then your uptake will be...
What's this concept, voluntary?
Yeah, exactly. Welcome to Europe.
Okay, maybe one last? No one dares?
No
okay.
one?
So, shameless plug again, 4:30,
yeah,
somewhere over there. I will give an OpenSUSE install demo to whoever might be interested. But other than that, thank you for
we hope
here.
you enjoyed it.